gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Eileen Padberg.
Well, thanks. It's so nice to be here. You know, I haven't been to this campus, although I do think a girlfriend of mine got married here about 15 years ago in the chapel, so I recognized it when we came up the hill. Anyway, it's a beautiful campus, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about my almost 2-year journey into Iraq during the most turbulent part of the war, 204 to 206. You might wonder how a 60-year-old political female consultant from Orange County, California, found herself in the midst of the Iraqi war, creating and running a program to help the Iraqi women participate in whatever new economy was going to come from the fall of Saddam Hussein. I've had my own political consulting firm for about 35 years. Actually, it's a lot more, but it sounds too old to say more. So I just leave it at 35. I've done strategic planning and for corporate clients and running political campaigns, including the 2 that you probably heard of. Everyone asks me about the Clint Eastwood campaign, actually. I have some great stories from that, but I won't bore you. In the aftermath of the initial invasion of Iraq, the U.S. Congress appropriated $18.4 billion for the reconstruction of Iraq. And most of the reconstruction of the infrastructure was really due to a lot of neglect. You know, there was 30 years of sanctions on Iraq, so there was no money going into Iraq. So most of it was due from mostly neglect, but a little bit from the war. A few of those Pentagon contracts that they let in the early part of the war in late 2003, they let thousands and thousands of U.S. government contracts, and only about 15 of them, which is really hard to believe, had one clause in it that said, in addition to your proposal to repair the water infrastructure or the oil and gas infrastructure, or whatever the infrastructure was, you have to include a plan to involve the Iraqi women in the reconstruction program. Yeah, it's pretty unheard of, actually, and nobody understands how it ever got in. It was really phenomenal. It hadn't been in any other U.S. government contracts ever before, and all of a sudden, in about, I don't know, way less than 100 contracts, this one clause showed up. And there are some who surmise that it might have been Colin Powell, which I sort of think it was. So on behalf of the bidders, you know, many U.S. government companies, big companies, international engineering companies, bid on these various and sundry U.S. government contracts. And on behalf of one of those bidders, I was asked to write the plan that would be submitted to involve the Iraqi women in the proposal. When I wrote it, it was in November of 2003, I think, and it was a slow time for me, so I said, sure, I'll write it. And I never had no intention, not one idea of ever going to Iraq. It was not part of my plan. I mean, I hate guns. I'm not good in war, you know. So I had no intention of going. But having been an activist on behalf of women's rights for years, I started from the premise that no matter where women come from, they always need basically the same things. We need opportunities. We need somewhat of a level playing field, and women will be great. So based on that, I decided to write my plan to provide women in Iraq, not knowing much about Iraq, only what I read in the papers, and how to get some jobs and some training and some opportunities that they could build businesses, because I believe that's how you get an economic stake in the economy. So months later, I think in February, the company notified me that they had not only won the contract that they submitted, but the Pentagon gave them the highest marks on the women's piece, which was phenomenal. I said, well, gee, great, congratulations, see you around. And they said, no, we want you to go to implement it. And I said, you're crazy, I'm not going there. I mean, I just bought a house in Laguna Niguel, and no, I'm not really going there. But I agreed to think about it, and so in 3 decades of professional consulting and working political management, government policy, and working to empower women, I sort of decided that this was a chance of a lifetime for me to put up or shut up for America and for women. I was turning 60 and I was pretty restless. Some would say that I've been restless all my life. I'd had the same clients for a long time. I was sort of bored with them. They were probably getting bored with me too. So I was thinking about doing something outside of my comfort level. For my 60th birthday, I'm a fly fisherman, but I don't know how to swim. So I was going to take surfing lessons. And so I know I needed to do something to get me out of my comfort zone, similar to what President Bush did at 80, jumped out of a helicopter. And I think Marion Bergeson did the same thing. She jumped out of a helicopter. So I wanted to do something that would get me out of my comfort level. So it was Iraq surfing. Yeah, that's exactly how I made the decision. So I decided that I would go for 6 months, and only 6 months. So I wanted to sort of reach beyond everything that I could imagine, everything that I had done in my life, to see if I could really accomplish what I had actually written on paper sitting at my desk in Laguna Niguel for women in Iraq. I looked at it as an adventure and an opportunity of a lifetime to not only impact the fledgling democracy, but support the efforts of my country and test my strength and commitment to women. Having been an activist on behalf of women's rights for years, I believed from the beginning that unless women have an economic stake in democracy, democracy will fail. And when you look through history, that certainly is proven. So I put my successful business on hold. I gave my clients to other people and said, take care of them for 6 months, I'll be back. We all agreed. I arrived in Baghdad on June 1st of 2004. The war had started in 2003, so it was pretty wild then. After 2 days of briefings in Kuwait, and the briefings really were just, don't pick anything up off the street. There could be a bomb on it. Don't ride mopeds. There could be a bomb on it. It was all that. It was no real training for putting a woman from Orange County, California, into a war zone. It was only that. And they handed me a bulletproof vest, a 40-pound bulletproof vest, and a gas mask, which was the only thing that sort of made me nervous. The gas mask I didn't like that at all. Iraq was not my first brush with an emerging democracy, however. I've done political training and organizing in Guatemala and Sri Lanka, in former Soviet Union, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, and Indonesia. But this was my first experience in a war zone, unless you count being a moderate Republican in conservative Orange County a war zone. There were days where I felt safer in Baghdad than I felt in Orange County. For those that know me, they know that's very true. So within a short period of time, I went from living in a 3,000 square foot house in Laguna Niguel to living in a high school classroom, smaller than this room, with 5 other women. There were 5 twin beds. Mattresses were about an inch or 2 inch thick, I think, maybe an inch. No partitions between the beds, no drawers to put your clothes in, nothing, no luxuries. The bathroom was outside and down the hall. So I was there 6 months, and then that was a school that was built for the Republican Guard, the children of the Republican Guard, and it was really a very nice school. The walls were cement, so the United States took it over, thinking that it would be safe enough to house all these American contractors. So we were located between the Ministry of Defense and the Tigris River. And in the early days of the war, the insurgents were not very good at lobbing mortars into the green zone, which I guess I should be thankful for. And so every morning at 6:30, between 6:30 and 7, the mortars would come over to try to hit the Ministry of Defense, and they would always fall in our yard of the schoolyard. And there were some people that were killed from that, so I don't make fun of it, but it was very scary. So it was my first welcome to the green zone, into a war zone. I thought, geez, I thought this just happened in the movies. My second 6 months, I lived in a trailer, and I use that word lightly. It was more like one of those huge containers that you see at the Port of Long Beach that had been turned into living spaces. There were 2 women to each side, and then this little tiny bathroom about the size of this podium in the middle, sort of glued with nail glue, I think. And that was our home for 6 months, very small. And that was behind the Republican Palace, which was the embassy. And that was called Mortar Alley. So every night at 7, mortars would come in trying to hit the palace and would land in our trailer park. And so the big voice in the sky would scream, "Take cover, take cover, take cover." And everybody would be running to the bunkers, and we'd sit there for 2 hours until we were all safe. And that was actually before they had drones up, because once they put the drones up, maybe 6, 8 months later, it was a little bit better, not a lot. At least with the drones, they could see where it was coming from, and they could get there in time to keep the rest of the blasts from happening. So my last 6 months, in August of 2005, we were moved into what is sort of like a Motel 6. And we had our own rooms. Our rooms were 9 by 12, which included a bathroom. You know, in California, our prison cells have to be bigger than that. But it was our own bathroom and our own dirty water that we could stand in instead of everybody else's. So we were all grateful for that. And so living with the constant sounds of gunfire, car bombs, mortars, just an incredible, I was telling Mr. Gates that just takes an incredible toll on your psyche. And I sort of knew when it was time to leave. When that stuff didn't bother me anymore, I knew it was time to leave, actually. It was sort of like earthquakes in California. We barely get out of bed anymore. And that's what was happening to me. So I was wearing a 40-pound flak jacket and a 9-pound helmet and traveling in carpools, as I call them, in up-armored cars with huge black guns that I'd never seen before, with big guys and big black guns, and everywhere we went. And so there usually was 3 cars, one in the back, one in the front, and I was in the middle. And signs on all the cars that said, you know, don't get near this car. If you do, you'll be killed. So, I mean, really oppressive, I think. And it literally, if anybody got close to the car, I mean, our guards would shoot at the ground next to whatever the car was. I mean, I was never a witness to anybody being shot, but I was a witness a lot to the aggressive behavior, trying to save me. So, I mean, it was all right. And I remember my first trip out to the Green Zone, and I had an Iraqi-American associate that I took with me, and it was probably 4 weeks. I'd been there 4 weeks, and they sent me out for the first time out of the Green Zone to meet the Ministry of Water, who actually was a woman, and a very powerful woman in the cabinet, who I immediately bonded with because we talked about her political career, and it was really interesting. Anyway, it was such an amazing experience, scary, and I remember we got in, and the guys closed the doors, and they said to both Esther and I, now, if anything happens, there's gunfire, anything, do not get out of the car. And I looked at them and I said, how do you think I would get out of this car? I'm not getting out of this car for anything. They will have to scrape me out of here. So, and they had a problem, you know, when they took men out and there was gunfire, men would oftentimes get out of the car and run, but I wasn't going to run anywhere. I was sticking. So that's why they had told us to stay with the car. In order to bring some normalcy to my life, I had my fly fishing gear sent from California, and I fished the polluted Tigris River every Friday morning. People used to think I was crazy, but it sort of helped my brain, you know. And the helicopters would fly over, and you'd see these Marines and contractors with their legs hanging out of the helicopter. You remember seeing it during the war with their big guns, and they would look down and they'd think, what in the world is she doing? But I was happy. I was a happy camper. Caught a lot of carp, gave some of it to the Iraqis because they like carp. I hate carp. but at least it was something to do on my Friday morning off. It was the only day we had off was Friday mornings, because Thursday was the Friday was the religious holiday, so we were all off Friday mornings. So I just want to give you just a quick reminder about Iraq, a refresher. 27 million people. This is a big country. It's about the size of California. Baghdad is 6 to 7 million people. Big, big city. Bigger than Orange County. It's bordered by Kuwait, Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. It's just an incredible place. It's the home of the Tigris River and the home of the Euphrates River. It still gives me goosebumps just to even talk about that, because it's just something that you grow up reading about. It's home to Babylon and the Hanging Gardens. It's just the most incredible historic place that you will ever be. The Iraqi women were fascinating. Women at the time were 63 to 65% of the population, because all the men had been killed. It was 2/3 of the workforce. So people had to pay attention to women in Iraq. I mean, 2/3 of the workforce was huge. Women in Iraq had more rights than most anywhere in the Middle East, except maybe Israel. They had a constitution in 1970 under Saddam that provided equal rights, the right to vote, the right to attend school. They could run for public office. They could own property, freedom from harassment laws. And in the workplace, they even had 5-year maternity benefits. So Iraq wasn't a backward country. It was a very metropolitan. It was the vacationing place for all of Europe for many years. But women were encouraged to get an education, and there were more women engineers in Baghdad than anywhere else in the Middle East. Iraqi women, are incredible. They're phenomenal. They're tough and clever. As evidenced by the fact that the very day that we bombed Baghdad and we all saw the Saddam statue coming off that pillar, women all over the country in Iraq were organizing and meeting to figure out how they were going to get their constitutional rights back. They were meeting that very day, no grass growing under their feet. Iraqi women expected to have a higher and more active role, because that's what President Bush had told them, as the entry to the war. But we sort of let them down from the beginning. We supported only 3 of 25 really, really capable women to the 250 Provisional Council, which would be their government in the beginning. And so we only supported 3 of 250 people when presented with 25 really capable, wonderful women. The Iraqi women, again, fearless. They marched and demanded 40% of representation in their parliament. And after 2 years, they ended up getting 25%, which is pretty good, considering, in the United States, we only have 18%, the home of the free, land of the brave, or home of the brave, land of the free. We only have 18% representation in our government. Rwanda has 49%, and South Africa has 50%, but we only have 18%. So we need more women in our, not wanting you to get out of the race, though. But, the Women's Initiative was a 3-pronged effort, which frankly reflects the needs of women most everywhere. Again, jobs, training, and opportunities to compete. By the end of March 2006, I had trained 1,190 mid-level government women in programs like leadership and management and computer training and finance and budget and English, public speaking and train the trainer programs. And I had very little resources, and so I would go on the internet at night and under the United Nations or under universities and find curriculum that I could sort of copy and change, write the curriculum, and then my Iraqi American assistant would go into Baghdad and find a professor who would teach the curriculum. And so we did that for quite a while. We trained like 30 women at a time, and we had all sorts of, we made them fill out a survey at the end of each day, what they learned, how they would use what they learned in their everyday life, what was missing from the curriculum. Then we had the professor fill out a survey. So every day I knew what was happening, how how it was doing, and we could make changes immediately. We trained approximately 350 women-owned businesses to bid and win U.S. government contracts. We had seminars all over Iraq. In the first 6 months, I had no budget for this program, even though it helped win the contract. As usual, you know, women's issues, women's needs are lower on the list of priorities. It's not that they don't like women, the United States government and contractors, but it was just low on the priority list. So I had no budget for 6 months, and I said to Esra, my Iraqi associate, we need to get out of here. We need to get out of the Baghdad. And it's hard for women to come into Baghdad to see us because they had to go through these long security lines, and the insurgents would take pictures of them as they came through the security lines, and then they would be killed later. And I can tell you it happened. So I said to Esra, let's get out of here. It doesn't cost us anything to travel in Iraq. If we can get a security team, then we could catch a flight. And, you know, a Black Hawk helicopter became my taxi. You know, it was pretty phenomenal. I'd never even seen a helicopter before. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'd seen them. But I'd never seen a Black Hawk helicopter. And so we traveled all over Iraq and did these seminars for women-owned businesses on how to bid for the U.S. government contracts and then how to win them. Because our government, working in Iraq, did not even have the common sense to put these contracts in Arabic. They would have them in English. And so it was very tough for women to figure out. I don't know how many of you have ever seen a government contract, but it could be 150 pages of gobbledygook. I mean, it's hard for me to figure it out. So we put it on I can't remember what else, you know, the slides, and we took our show on the road, and we trained women-owned businesses all over Iraq. And then even after a year and a half, I finally got our government to agree to set-asides for women-owned businesses. And I'm not normally supportive of set-asides, but in Iraq, I mean, it was obvious that the only way women were going to get ahead there was to have some break in getting U.S. government contracts so they could start businesses. And I always made the women who won contracts sign a letter of agreement with me that they would hire other women and train them so that they can bid and win U.S. government contracts. So by the end of my 2 years there, we know of 500 U.S. government contracts awarded to women-owned businesses. There were more, but the ones we tracked were the 500. So it wouldn't be me if I didn't share with you some of my personal observations, and which I think are the most important thing. You know, we made big mistakes in Iraq, and no surprise to anybody here. We didn't send enough troops. We didn't close off the borders. We fired all the military, all the police, all the heads of corporations, and many, many university professors, all thought to be Ba'ath Party supporters. Now, in Iraq in those days, you had to be a Ba'ath Party member if you were to get jobs or feed your family. It's much like 10 years ago, you had to be a Republican in Orange County to get work. I mean, some of you will remember that. Right, Jeff? Yeah. So we didn't invest in the people of Iraq at all. We didn't invest in the people of Iraq. We hired thousands of third world country workers, and we flew them to Iraq to do jobs that the Iraqis could have and should have done. So we weren't, you know, we put out of work all these men who couldn't feed their families. And then we wonder why they went to the insurgents for $300 to put a bomb under our car. I mean, we insulted them. We imported everything. We brought into Iraq thousands of copy machines. We imported every ream of paper. We imported every pencil. We imported every can of food. Everything was imported from the U.S. or from Britain into Iraq. We didn't buy anything in Iraq. And most disappointing, of course, now is that Iraq has turned into just as dangerous today as it was then. I just read a report yesterday that said that over 6,000 people have been killed just in the last 30 days in Iraq. The violence is horrible. I have a couple of friends that I speak with occasionally from on the internet, and they're really afraid for their lives. It's almost worse today than it was. So after spending $1 trillion, that's a lot of money, and losing over 6,000 US military lives, plus 100,000 Iraqi lives, they still have no clean water, very little electricity, maybe a few hours a day. We were so focused on building state-of-the-art everything, state-of-the-art water supply, state-of-the-art everything, that we failed to have a plan, and we failed to think how they were going to take care of it after we left. On the banks of the Tigris River, where I fished every Friday morning, sits the new U.S. Embassy. It is the largest U.S. embassy in the whole entire world. It cost over $750 billion to build. It is larger than Vatican City. It's 1.5 miles long, which 94 football fields long. Just incredible. Can you imagine? Right on the banks of the Tigris River. That would be like the Iraqis coming here to Newport Beach and building their embassy overlooking the ocean, taking prime property. It's heavily fortified, it's self-contained, it has a full-size basketball court, full-size soccer field, a pool with 6 lanes for swimming. It houses approximately 16,000 people. Our U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, which we knew we were going to leave, so I don't get that. The operating budget in 2012 was $14 billion for the year, plus $6 billion for security contractors. So there is much about Iraq in my time there that I will never forget, and I have not enough time to tell you all of those, but the highlights are the Iraqi women who lived such incredibly tragic lives. If you can just imagine when you go off to work in the morning, you never know whether you're going to see your husband and your kids that night. You send them off to school, you don't know if they're going to come back. I mean, you live with that constant stress. But they could joke. I mean, having lunch with the Iraqi women, which they speak pretty good English, having lunch with the Iraqi women is just like having lunch with my girlfriends here. We laugh about the same things. We laugh about men. It's interesting. Women are the same all over the world, believe me. The other thing I won't forget is that I had a $300,000 reward on my head, which all American women did, but I was one of few in the green zone at the time. And I always told, Marion would remember this, but I told my bosses, which was CH2M Hill at the time, that's who I worked with, that if they settled for anything less than $1 million, I would sue them, because I thought I was worth a lot more than $300,000. I was assigned a flak jacket and a helmet and a gas mask. I'll never forget having to wear that it got up to be 130, 135 degree weather. I mean, it was incredible. I used to say to my guards all the time, who complained when I wouldn't wear my vest, sell this as a weight loss program and I'll probably be happy to wear it, but don't tell me it's going to save my life, 130 pounds. I mean, 130 degrees and 40 pounds. Traveling in Iraq, 3 days to go the distance of 500 miles. I mean, the women's programs were way low on the priority list, so Esther and I would go out to the helicopter field or to the C-130 field, and we would be prioritized for flights. And oftentimes, of course, soldiers got first priority, which is right, and generals and all of those people. And then we were always the last priority. So sometimes we'd wait 3 days in a tent to get a flight to go less than 500 miles. But I could never travel unless I had security, so that was an important thing. And I wouldn't. I mean, I'm not stupid. I was adventurous, but I'm not stupid. I'll never forget my first ride on a C-130. Oh my God, I didn't even know what a C-130 was. I'll never forget that night. We were going down to Gila so we had to board at night, and it was so hot. It was 150 degrees that night, I swear. And it was my first time. My heart was beating, dragging a suitcase, and it was so hot from the plane and from the weather that I thought the skin on my face was going to peel off. First thing I said when I got in the plane to Esther was, is my skin still on my face? It felt like it had come off. It was so hot. I'll never forget crossing the Tigris River. Oh my God, for the first time, from the Baghdad airport to the Green Zone, we were on a bus that had all these curtains, and so people couldn't see who was in the bus. And I moved the curtains over when we passed, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to fish there someday. And I did. I fished there. I'll never forget the constant sounds of gunfire, mortars, tracers in the sky. We used to go up to the top of the school and watch, because the actual war, was less than a mile from us, and we could see the tracers in the sky when our soldiers were fighting. I mean, it was just the most phenomenal feeling in the world. I'll never forget my first trip out of the Green Zone. As I said, it was just such a feeling of terror. Knowing that somebody wanted to kill me that didn't even know me. I know a lot of people that know me want to kill me, but to think that people would want to kill me that didn't know me was terrifying. I'll never forget my first Black Hawk helicopter. They didn't tell us that when they land, they would dump all these flares out that would draw enemy fire before they land, so we wouldn't be blown up. And so they forgot to tell us that. And of course, as we started to land, the flares dropped out, and I thought we were hit. I really did. Esther and I just grabbed each other, and we thought we were hit. But we didn't scream or carry on or anything. We were just too scared. I'll never forget standing beside the Euphrates River. I'll never forget that with Polish soldiers down in Gila. Incredible feeling. Touring Babylon and seeing that lion that you see in all the photos. I'll never forget the suicide bombers that blew up the Green Zone Cafe, which is a little Iraqi cafe inside the Green Zone that we all used to eat at. We were told that we weren't allowed to go there by our guards, but you know how Americans are, adventurous. And we would go to the Green Zone Cafe, so we would have a break from eating mess hall food every day. The Green Zone Cafe and the Haji Mart was bombed and blown up in October of 2004, 2 days after I got back from my R&R. 10 of the guys that I rode back with were killed in that bombing. I'll never forget Thanksgiving in November 2004 in Baghdad. It was the most phenomenal thing. They brought in a turkey, and a whole bunch of my friends, we all got together. And just as we were all sitting down to dinner, the mortars started hitting our compound. And so we all had to rush into the bunkers with our turkeys sitting on our plates. I'll never forget fly fishing the Tigris River. I mean, I can one-up anybody I know fly fishing now to say that, okay, you sure have fished everywhere, but have you fished the Tigris River? I'll never forget being told that an Iraqi woman that I knew and worked with was drugged out of her home in the middle of the night and shot dead in front of her kids and her husband because she was working with the Americans. And believe me, it was the first of many. I used to do a training, public relations speaking training program at the ministry every Wednesday, and that's when I knew I had to leave because there was this tunnel that we had to go through. We had to drive through this tunnel, and the guards were freaked out all the time that I had the same route and mostly the same time every week. And so on 2 occasions, we just missed a big mortar under the bridge. And so they stopped allowing me to do that. So that was when I knew it was time to leave, and I was starting to take those kinds of risks. It was time to come home. I just want to close with saying that the war in Iraq had a profound influence on the Middle East, on global stability, the security of the United States, and it had an incredible impact on me. I want you to know in closing that it didn't define me, but it was the single biggest challenge that I ever faced in my entire life. It tested my deepest resolve every day. As soon as my eyes opened in the morning, it was a struggle, not only coping with the bureaucracy of Iraq, but also the violence. Anyway, that's all I have to say. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any that I can. Yes.
You mentioned that you were tracking 500. Out of that, how many are still around?
It's hard to tell, but I know that there's at least 5 still around that have their own business, that are still contracting. You know, mostly we've left Iraq, but there are some projects that are still overseen. So I know there are still 5 women-owned businesses that are still intact and running. But I know a lot of those women stayed and worked. They built their careers.
What
I don't. I know the minister that I was telling you about, this wonderful woman, she's now in Toronto, so she's gone. Most of the aspiring women left Iraq. Anybody else?
Oh, he asked one question. I heard a report on the radio the other day that there's been an unprecedented number of Iraqi women being detained and put into jail. What's driving that?
Well, the insurgency is creating much more danger for women, and I want to say it's sort of similar to here, but it's in the poorest areas and the most religious areas are the areas where women are really held back. In the educated areas, in the big cities like Baghdad, women are encouraged to work and do everything. But it is very dangerous for women because the insurgents, that's how they scare people, is to go after the women. Women are the easy targets, so they scare women who are refusing to wear the cloth, although they do wear scarves over their heads. They refuse to cover their face, so it's very dangerous for women.
When do we see the book and the screenplay?
You know, I kept a diary that I wrote in every day, and I've gone back and read that diary a couple times, and it's hard for me to, I know so many people wrote books. I just have a hard time going through that. It was a very tough life, and emotionally, it was more than I had anticipated. So it's really hard for me to think about writing a book, although I know right now I'm ready, but nobody wants to read about it now. Now that I'm ready to write the book, nobody's interested. Few people are interested. So I missed my opportunity.
Just to follow on, having had this experience just for the last hour,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure interested, and I think it's an absolutely compelling story of bravery and every imaginable positive trait. And for your cause of helping women, this has got to be one of the great, wonderful stories about what an individual woman can do with commitment.
Thank you. I was very committed. As Marion knows, I've been committed for a long time. And
when are you going to be committed, by the way?
Yeah, I should have been committed. It was so disappointing. I never made judgments on whether we should have gone to Iraq. That's for people that were way above my pay grade. But the disappointments that I found having gotten there, and then as I look back, are so incredible. How the State Department, how the U.S. government treated the Iraqis with just disdain. All the things that President Bush said about helping the Iraqis, the Iraqi women get their rights back, all of that. When you got on the ground, none of that was evident. And even our own embassy, the women's program was a joke. It was just such a joke. My program was the only thing going, only because I decided that since I'd already risked my life and the life of my Iraqi-American friend, that by God, I was going to get something done. I'm already here, just get out of my way. And so that's what I did. I was pretty stubborn. Well, I still am.
I think that the book in your book should be lessons learned.
Yeah.
Because I think you have a great deal of insight, just your experiences. And that's, as I was taking notes, those are the things to me are very compelling. We invested time, talent, and treasure in Iraq. And we're reaping none of what we invested.
None.
Except that we didn't invest where we should have, which is what you're talking about. We didn't invest. For us to think that building a billion-dollar embassy on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates River, anybody in their right mind would say, I don't think that's a good idea. Let's not. But for us to think, and it looks like all that came about was we look like arrogant Americans.
Well, we did, and I think we're doing the similar in Afghanistan. I don't know that we learned any lessons, which really is dismaying to me. We built that huge embassy, and we didn't use one Iraqi to help build it. We imported Filipinos. And it's just a constant insult to the Iraqis, you know, that needed to have a job, any job. And it's very disappointing. Looking back on my government, I mean, it's pretty disappointing.
Well, that's just the problem, that's the benefit of the book. It's not only Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, it's that system problem with our government, the way we do things. Sometimes we go for the most expensive, not the most effective, even in our own social programs in this country.
Right.
That would be the benefit of the book. One more time, lessons not learned.
Yeah. I remember saying to an engineer who was telling me about the water reclamation project that my team was working on. And I kept saying, well, so why does it have to be state of the art? I mean, when you go outside, everything is 1958. I mean, can't we like do 1970? You know, it just to me is incomprehensible how we could make the same mistakes over and over again. Larry?
Yeah, if you were supreme dictator of the United States.
And you know I would love to be.
I'd vote for you.
Thanks.
If we had a choice to vote.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
What would you do about Iraq today?
Well, I'm not sure there's anything you can do today. You know, having sort of determined while I was there, I was very pro going to Iraq. You know, supporting my government, supporting my president. I was pro going to Iraq. But once I got there, I realized when you're sitting there talking, I mean, I ate in a mess hall 3 times a day with thousands of other soldiers, contractors, and, you know, we talked. And you could tell it's just, there were no weapons of mass destruction. I mean, Iraq didn't even have anything that worked. I mean, everything was held together by nail glue. I mean, it just phenomenal. So, you know, I think at that time I would have stayed longer. I think I know we can't stay forever, but you know, Maliki is so awful. I mean, and he's the same as the guy in Afghanistan. They say such horrible things about the United States to the press, but to the Americans, you know, that visit, they say, "Give me more money, give me more money." They're getting wealthy, and the people are not. And so I don't know that I would do. I don't know what to do differently. I definitely would have done more for women. I truly believe, with every ounce of anything that I have in my body, if we had done more for women and invested more in women getting jobs, building careers so they could feed their families, they would have helped more in making sure that their sons, fathers, uncles, brothers weren't going out for $300 getting bombs to bomb the Americans. I mean, I definitely think I would have done a lot better job on that.
I have a question. First of all, your story is just amazing.
Thank you.
I'm a faculty member here, and I teach intercultural, international type courses for undergrad and grad. And some of us are also faculty here. My question is, what message would you like for us to give our, the millennials, these young, particularly the young women, the young men too, about the passion and motivation that you had to do that? Because some of the things we might be seeing in our classrooms, the 19, 20-year-olds, is a complacency. These are very smart students academically, but it's something of the comfort zone of Orange County. And
Yeah, I know it.
Stepping out of that comfort zone is going to Paris. You know, that's
Yeah.
What would you, not all obviously. but
Yeah, no, I know.
What message would you like for me and my fellow colleagues here tomorrow to class to take to these young people?
I think mostly, and I'm not a sexist, believe me. Maybe I am, but I don't think I am. But I really believe that unless more women are at the tables of government, at business, helping to make decisions, I don't mean to be all men, but I think we need more women. I don't think women would be so easily apt to go to war without thinking about, okay, what's our plan? I mean, are we going to repaint the palace, or, you know, what is the plan here? I really think that's the message, that we need more women to get involved in their country and their government. We need more women to step up. I mean, you know, I only was what I was because of the women before me. and the Marion Bergesons of the world, who the first, and they need to look around and find women mentors, and they need to get it together and take part in their government. I mean, when I think we have a presidential election, only 30% of the people vote, it just makes me sick to my stomach. That's the first thing that would be taken away from us if we were ever taken. If we were ever at war, we would lose, the first thing we'd lose was our right to vote, and then women would lose all their votes. That's what they're doing in Egypt now. So, I had one over here.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about the sort of failures of the U.S. government as a whole. What would you say were some of your specific successes?
I think mostly the training programs were definitely, but I think my biggest success, because you can't, I didn't have the largest numbers, so I think the biggest success I had was in building up the character and the courage for the women that I worked with. And if you ask them what they got out of my 2 years, I think that's what they would say, that I gave them the courage to go out on their own, to stay on their own, to work, to build a life, to build a career. Iraqi women in the past had not been apt to build careers. They had jobs, and some good jobs, but they were not apt to build careers because the system there is men take care, whether it's the uncle, brothers, fathers, sons take care of the women. That's the way it's always been. But now, since so many men have died, women need to step up to the plate and build careers. And I think giving them the courage to do that was my biggest success.
Can I ask a follow-up question that
Sure.
might be a little bit sensitive? You said that some of the women you worked with were killed for participating with American programs. How did you deal with that emotionally and sort of continue on your work?
That's a good question.
Putting people at risk.
Yeah.
At the same time you're trying to help.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to get out of the green zone, that it wasn't as dangerous for women coming to me if we were out of the green zone, but coming into the green zone was such a very tough thing for them to do. So, we went to all the cities in Iraq and had these women-owned businesses, these conferences. So it's hard to deal with the fact. I mean, the woman that I worked with when I first got there, who headed, this is crazy. There was a Business Women's Association in Iraq when I got there in 2004. And so we tracked her down, and I worked with her a lot. Now, her association was women who cleaned houses to women who owned a car lot. I mean, the vast array of women. And we worked a lot together because she could communicate outside because telephones and emails are, our government is always worried that they would be intercepted, and then the women gathering someplace would be killed, which was really what the insurgents were doing in the first part of the war, which is why I would do these seminars, but I couldn't go to any of the seminars. That's why I had all the reports, because if I showed up with 3 up-armored cars, and then all the insurgents knew that something was going on. It's really hard. Anyway, so she was kidnapped one morning coming out of her house and drug into a car, beat up really bad. All of her papers, all of her phones, everything was stolen. So then, our government made us change phones and everything, because then the insurgents would have my number, which wouldn't have done them any good. I didn't answer it anyway. So, so we took all the kinds of precautions that we could, but it's as I said in the beginning, it's very emotionally draining to have worked in that situation, and most of it was because I did lose friends, women friends that I knew.
One more question?
Yeah.
Well, maybe a positive note. One of the things we keep forgetting is the impact the individuals have, the American men, women, in government, outside of government, and giving the women hope, giving the Iraqis hope, realizing there is another course. There are the things you can do. The same with the students. Do what you can do. If we say in the military, something X happens every now and then, you still have to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And just the interaction, whether all the countries we've been involved in impacting
Right.
Vietnam, Bosnia, and the Middle East. In fact, we are there, separate from the government.
Yes.
We do have a big impact on people.
We
They see-
do.
They see there is another way to live.
And I have to tell you, I have to close with two things. One, that people don't hate us in Iraq or Afghanistan. I mean, they hate our government,
That's right.
but they really do love Americans. I have, in all the places that I have traveled and really worked in, Kyrgyzstan and all the places, I've never been mistreated as an American woman. I've always been accepted fully. And then one last thing, these, I wear these every time I give a speech. These crystals and these earrings are from Saddam's palace, his chandelier that our MiGs bombed, and the chandelier fell to the floor and all these crystals fell. And I picked up a couple handfuls of them early in the war, and I had them made into a necklace and earrings. Thank you.
Thank you.